2,000 a week. Welcome to the High School Preview Show presented by Gold Athletics. I'm your host, John Serenitas. And as always, I'm joined by my partner, Tyler Amaral. Tyler, how are you this evening?
I'm good. It's crazy to think this is the last week of September and we're already approaching the midway point here.
Yeah, it is crazy. It's hard to believe that we're already after this weekend in Massachusetts. We'll be past week 4 and you're like you said, you're heading into the halfway point of the season now, and October's a grind. It's a long stretch, but once you get through October, you're into the playoffs, and then before you know it, it's over. But you know what? We're going to be here with you every step of the way, breaking it all down and providing you with some of the best high school football coverage in New England. Before we get started here, I do want to remind you that we are brought to you by Gold Athletics. Coaches, whether you're a fall coach, winter coach, spring coach, you all need to fundraise. And if you need to fundraise, there's no better fundraising organization than Gold Athletics. Matt Ross and his team have a variety of fundraisers that you can do that fit your program, help you generate revenue, and help you support your program. Visit goldathletics.com today, and you can go onto the website and find which fundraiser you want. Contact Matt. He'll get you in contact with one of his team members, and they'll get you going, and you'll be making money in no time. Again, visit goldathletics.com today. All right, big week ahead, some big matchups throughout New England. We're going to start here in Massachusetts. Big one out in Western Mass will be at this one. Xaverian at Springfield Central. Xaverian has certainly looked the part. The defending D1 champs have been impressive thus far, coming off a blowout win over Everett. This will be their stiffest test yet this year, but Xaverian and Springfield Central, very familiar with each other, Tyler. They've been a common opponent here the last 2 years. This should be another really good matchup between these two D1 powers.
I think it's on the short list of best games of the year, at least on paper. And they've played some thrillers recently. They played a couple good ones last year, and they could play a couple good ones again this year. So I think on paper, these are two of the top 3 or 4 most talented teams in the state. They both, I think have kind of looked apart, especially against in-state competition. Central got beat up a little bit by Iona. They came back, rebounded nicely against Central Catholic. I think the tough thing when you're going against Springfield Central is it looks like Isaiah Rogers is going to be healthy for this game. So they got Rogers, and then Josiah Cox had 4 touchdowns against Central Catholic. So it's the best backfield in the state, in my opinion. Then you got Jared Stain and a couple of D1 receivers and Barber and Early as well. So on paper, again, I think Springfield Central is probably the most talented team in the state. I've picked against Xaverian twice in big games. Going back to last season, I picked against them twice against St. John's Prep. They won both of those games. So Al Fornaro is probably going to be happy to hear me pick against the Hawks here. It's going to be a fantastic game. I've got Central winning, making a play late, something like 35-28. It's going to be a great game, though.
Yeah, we're going to find out what Central's all about this week. I think that, look, in fairness to Springfield Central, because they're out in Western Mass, I do think that they perennially fly under the radar. But I've always said they had an impressive win a couple of weeks ago at Central Catholic. But this is really the litmus test in state for them. If they can beat Xaverian, I think they're on their way. If they beat Xaverian, I think it's fair to say if they're not the favorite in D1, they'll certainly be one of the 2 favorites along with St. John's Prep. But that's going to be easier said than done. That Xaverian defense is tough with Micah Amity and Funk and the rest of that crew. And then, of course, offensively, Vincent Busa comes out of nowhere last week, has a monster game with over 300 yards rushing. Now, all of a sudden, and Xaverian's always at their best when they can pound the rock and play good deep. This looks like a signature Xaverian team. I think this is going to be a really good game here. I'm going to go with the X here. They won last year in the playoffs. I think they kind of have Springfield Central's number a little bit. I think they're a tough matchup for them. I think Xaverian goes out on the road and picks up a big win for them. All right, next up we have Foxborough King Philip in a big Hockomock League matchup. Surprisingly enough, the Warriors of Foxborough have opened the season at 0-2. They're coming off a bye. They're taking on a King Philip team that got more than they bargained for last week in a 28-7 win over Norwood. This is one of the best rivalries in the Hawk. It's always physical. It's always closely contested and low scoring. This matchup should be no different.
I think Foxborough, they could enter the postseason with 3 or 4 losses, kind of depending on how things shake out over the next month or so. And I think they'll be flying under the radar at that point. But the caveat here is that they've played a much more challenging schedule, and they will continue to play a much more challenging schedule than anyone else in Division 5. I saw them play week 1 against Foxborough. They lost on the Hail Mary at the last second. Scituate, we've seen what Scituate's done the last 2 weeks. They've dominated their opponents. So Scituate's a very good team. In my opinion, that's the favorite in Division 4. So they played the favorite in Division 4, then they play the 2023 runner-up in Division 3 and Walpole, and they lose a close one on that one as well. So they can very easily be 2-0. Right now they're 0-2 against 2 teams in higher divisions, 2 teams that are going to compete in their divisions. I think it's kind of similar, or we're going to see a similar outcome again this week. They're playing a King Philip team that's very good, one of the favorites in Division 2. Credit to Foxborough for challenging themselves in this Hockomock League crossover battle. I think this will be closer. Like, it's always tough to, when you see common opponents, I think naturally a lot of people are like drawn into those, and you say, well, KP kind of beat up on Walpole and Walpole beat Foxborough, so KP is going to blow up Foxborough. I don't think we should look at it this way. This is a rivalry game, 2 programs with proud tradition and a history of success, 2 defending state championship programs. So I think this is going to be a tough battle. I think it's going to be something like 28-14 KP. But I just don't think Foxborough has the horses to hang with a team of KP's caliber at this point.
Yeah, I've coached in this game way too many times in my career to think it'll be that high scoring. I mean, I think it'll be more like a 17-14 kind of game. I mean, I think that these 2 teams know each other well. I think you make a great point in terms of the rivalry and what it means to both schools and both programs. I think it's going to be a terrific game. It's going to be close like it is every year. But I will say this, and I've cautioned people the last couple of weeks. Foxborough, in my opinion, is still, if not the favorite in D5, among the favorites. They challenge themselves. They play a great schedule. At the end of the day, regardless of how they finish, they're still going to have a relatively high seed in D5, and I still think they're the favorite. I still think on paper they're the best team in Division 5. Yes, you got Shawshene, you got Fenwick, you got a couple of other programs, but I think at the end of the day, Foxborough, to me, entering the playoffs, will still be, if not the favorite among the favorites. This should be a hell of a game. Next up, we have Catholic Memorial. I don't even remember the last time they played. I think it was like 2 weeks ago. But Catholic Memorial at Leominster. Of course, CM's game last weekend was canceled by St. Francis because of illness. So, unfortunately, the Knights couldn't go out to New York and play St. Francis. They do get back into action this week against a Leominster team that is off to a really good start. Of course, you got quarterback Osiris Lopez, one of the top signal callers in the state of Massachusetts, a Power 4 type quarterback. Look, CM lost to a very good Cardinal Hayes team, a Cardinal Hayes team in New York that should make another championship run like they did last year. They've had a couple of weeks here now to lick their wounds, get healthy. Leominster will present some challenges with Lopez in this passing game, but if CM does what they do, they should be in pretty good shape in this game.
Yeah, I agree. I think there could be a rust factor early on. Like, they haven't played since that opening weekend. So what was that? September 7th was when they played Cardinal Hayes. So it's 20 days between games by the time this one kicks off. So that could be tough. They'll be well rested, but I think there's going to be a little bit of a rust factor, especially on the defense. I wouldn't be surprised to see Osiris Lopez lead a couple touchdown drives early. I ultimately think CM will settle in. I think they're the better team. We just talked about Central and Zavarian, CM, St. John's Prep. I think these are, probably the 4 most talented teams in the state. I was impressed with CM and how they were able to hang with Hayes. Hayes, pretty much a consensus top 100 team in the country at this point, or they were preseason anyway. So CM had a chance to win that game. So I think CM's, poised for another run here in Division 2 and poised to be another, one of the top 2 or 3 best teams in the state. So I think Leominster's very good team, potent offense. Lopez, in my opinion, is probably the best quarterback in the state. So I think Leominster's going to be able to hang tough for a little bit at least. I think ultimately, though, CM just has too many horses they're able to pull away.
Yeah, I think this game's going to come down to the line of scrimmage. If Leominster can hold their own up front, then they'll have a shot at potentially winning this game. But I think ultimately CM, despite their inexperience, is a little better up front. That's the difference. And look, Mekhi Dodd is a dude. He is going to wear people out over the course of 4 quarters. And it's not just Dodd. I mean, CM has a bevy of running backs that can impact the game. And, of course, it's John DiBiase. You know the quarterback play is going to be pretty good. And don't sleep on this receiving core. We don't talk a lot about them, but there's a lot of talent there. And I think those guys are going to become a bigger and bigger part of that CM offense as the season goes on. They were a big part of that week 1 game against Cardinal Hayes. I think this game's going to be closer than people think, but I'm going to go CM here. I think Leominster, though, represents themselves well. Next up, we have a pretty intriguing interstate matchup, at least on paper. LaSalle Academy will be going up to Danvers. LaSalle out of Providence, Rhode Island. We'll be going up to Danvers to take on St. John's Prep. Of course, the Prep is off to a very impressive start. Freshman quarterback Christopher Vargas. We've heard the hype. We've heard the talk. He's the real deal. He looks the part. He's been fantastic. Of course, LaSalle has a couple big wins the last 2 weeks. They beat St. John Shrewsbury at home, which is a nice win for them. And then they avenged the loss to North Kingstown last Saturday. Jeff Marcone has the Rams pointed back in the right direction. They look like they're going to be a player in D1 in Rhode Island. Look, on paper, LaSalle is better than they were last year. I give Marcone credit for playing this game. Ultimately, I still think the Prep is the better team, and I think they're going to flex their muscle here. But don't be surprised if LaSalle plays them tough. They play a tough schedule. They're well coached. This game could be closer than people think, especially early.
Yeah, and I'm going to say this every time we talk about LaSalle. I love how they scheduled LaSalle and Hendricken, really, how they've scheduled these out-of-state opponents. LaSalle, I think they have BC High, St. John's Shrewsbury, St. John's Prep, Barnstable. So it's half their schedule is Massachusetts teams. I love to see that. I was at this game last year in Providence, and St. John's Prep dominated from start to finish. It wasn't competitive at all. LaSalle had some young pieces last year, though, and St. John's Prep lost quite a bit to graduation. The Eagles reload. We know what they do. But the Rams, I expect them to be a little bit better this year. I think they're going to be right in the mix, of course, in Rhode Island again this year in Division I. I think this game will be closer. I just don't think that they're going to be able to stop that Vargas to Barlow connection. And I'm not really sure many teams in New England would be able to. So I think that's ultimately going to be the difference. They make plays every week. They'll make plays again here. I like the Prep.
Yeah, I do too. I think LaSalle has enough to hang with them for a quarter anyway. But I think ultimately, you mentioned the Vargas to Barlow connection. I mean, they're only going to get better as the year goes on. Look, we've always felt with St. John's Prep, we know they're going to run the ball well. We know they'll be big, they'll be physical. We know Brian St. Pierre likes to pound the rock. But if they can complement that running game with a good passing game like they have now, forget it. They're virtually impossible to stop for opposing high school teams. I think that's going to be the case here. I think that they just have a little too much for LaSalle. I think they take care of business, win, and continue to move along here and improve to 4-0. Next up, we have a Bay State League matchup, a good old school matchup here. This game, of course, has been moved to Saturday night at 6 p.m. Walpole at Wellesley. Walpole coming off, both of these teams are actually coming off of tough losses. Walpole coming off a tough 14-7 loss to Natick. They lost on a blocked punt. Wellesley losing a heartbreaker to Milford 7-6. This is a nice rivalry in the Bay State League, has been for a long time. Should be a pretty good matchup between two programs that know each other well.
Yeah, first off, a night game in Wellesley. Thank you.
The presses.
I know, right? Stop the presses is right. So that's good to see. High school football should be played at night, so that's good to see. That
couldn't agree more.
So it's good to see that game is.
Tell that to the ADs that are playing at 5:30 and 6 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah, I know. It's ridiculous.
What the hell is that all about?
So I think this is going to kind of take a similar path to both of these teams' games last week. I think it's going to be a low-scoring game. I wouldn't be surprised if it was something like 14-10, 14-7. That's really what I'm expecting. This is a really good matchup here. These are two teams that are going to be in the playoffs, Walpole D3, Wellesley D2. So this is honestly the hardest game of the slate that we're picking this week. This is the one I had the most difficulty with. I think I lean Wellesley here. I think that's going to be an electric atmosphere there on Saturday night. I lean Wellesley. This is a true toss-up, but I lean Wellesley. I think Lucas Prock makes a play late, 14-7, 14-10 type of game.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a low-scoring affair as well, and it always is when these two play. They've had some great games through the years. I'm even going back to the 80s when you had the Andy Levin, John Lee games. Into the 90s, they had some really good games. I mean, Wellesley had some really good teams in the 90s. One of the preeminent wing T programs in the state, too. I think Jesse Davis, who played for Andy Levin on those teams, he's done a great job there. And, of course, Chris Sullivan, who played at Walpole, he's done a great job there. I'm going to go Walpole here. I think Noah McKenzie is going to finally start to get into a groove here. We saw it a couple of weeks ago against Foxborough. He started to find his mojo. They ran into a pretty good Natick team that's big and physical up front. But I think Walpole does enough in this one. It'll be a low-scoring, close game. But I think Walpole does enough in this one to pull it out in a 14-13, 17-14 kind of game. Next up, we go up to the MVC. We have Chelmsford visiting Methuen. Pretty good matchup here. Chelmsford has one of the best offensive lines in the MVC. And, of course, Methuen is one of the best players in the state in Shane Eason. Chelmsford, tough loss to Bishop Fee a couple weeks ago. Methuen, tough loss to Marshfield. Both programs, of course, are among the best in the MVC. This should be a terrific matchup between two teams that are different in many ways in terms of star players, but very similar in terms of the way they want to play.
Yeah, I think this game is going to be pretty similar to the game Chelmsford played last week against Andover. That shootout, 38-35. I think that's kind of how Methuen wants to play. They want to get Easton out in space. They want to get Josh Kwaki out in space, and they get good quarterback play as well. So I think Methuen, they have had a week to kind of reflect here on that loss to Marshfield, the game that they were dominating early. Like the first 13 minutes, it looked like they were going to score 50 or 60 points and blow Marshfield out of the water. So I think they're a little bit upset about that and how that game kind of unfolded and how they let that one slip away. This is a really good game. It's, a good test here, two MVC powers. I think it's going to be a tough battle, but I like Methuen. I think Easton's just too dynamic for most teams in the state to match up with.
Yeah, I agree. I think Methuen has had a week to lick their wounds and refocus, and I think they're going to do that here. Chelmsford, look, you got Brown. They're strong up front. That's going to keep them in games. You saw it last week against Andover. But I think ultimately, this Methuen team is a little bit more skilled, and that proves to be the difference. I think this will be a really good game. I'm with you. I could see it being a high-scoring game. I'm going to go with the Rangers in this one. Next up, we have Duxbury at Franklin. Panthers have been on a roll here since losing opening weekend to Central Catholic. 2 impressive wins against Wachusett and Brockton last week. Duxbury, again, this isn't your typical Duxbury team. They're winning with their running game and their defense, but it's Duxbury. They know how to win, and they're finding ways how to win. This will be a really good test for Franklin. Franklin looks like they could be pretty good. We're going to find out just how good they are when they play this Duxbury team. Conversely, for Duxbury, long bus ride out to Franklin, good Hockomock League program. It's also going to be a very good test for them. I see this game potentially, Tyler, playing out like that Mansfield-Duxbury game did at Mansfield last year, where it could be close and maybe Duxbury's experience proves to be the difference at the end and they eke out a win. Your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, it should be a good one. Franklin. So I think, Franklin was really scrappy kind of in that game week 1 against Central Catholic. They fell behind early, ended up having a chance to tie the game late. So I think it's going to unfold and be a similar game to that. I think you're right, John. It's going to be a pretty competitive game here. I think Franklin's good, and I think they're kind of flying under the radar here. They've really dominated Wachusett and Brockton. Now, those two programs aren't where they have been in years past, but still, 2 very impressive wins over 2 D1 programs. I think Duxbury, since that first half, they gave up 20 points to Abington, and they were all scored pretty quickly. Abington had 20 points early in the third quarter. They kind of settled in nicely. Then they shut out Mansfield. They hold Hanover to a touchdown. So I think the defense is really settled in here. It's a very good defensive team, good offensive line, good running game with Jack Reese and Trevor Jones. I think Reese and Jones are just too dynamic. They make some plays. 21-14 Dragons.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think Franklin plays them tough. I think it goes into the fourth quarter as a potential toss-up game. But I think Trevor Jones is the difference here. His ability to make plays in the running game from the quarterback position, I think, will be the difference in this one. I see this game from Franklin's standpoint playing out almost like that Central Catholic game did, where maybe they fall behind early, fight back, tie it, and then I think Duxbury scores late to pull away. Either way, if Franklin wins this game, I think they're going to send the Hockomock League a pretty loud message. If Duxbury wins this game, now you can start to think about, okay, they're going to get into their Patriot League slate here. They've proven that they can play with some of the better programs in the state. you've got to now start talking about them once again as one of the favorites in D4. Next up, we're going to go to Central Mass here. We got Clinton at Bay Path. Bay Path has jumped out to a 2-0 start, and they look like they could be a contender in D6. Clinton had a tough loss a couple of weeks ago to Hudson, who looks like they might be one of the two favorites in D6, but then bounced back with a win over Oakmont. Should be a pretty good game here. Bay Path is kind of flying under the radar here a little bit.
Bay Path is flying under the radar, and they have probably the second best back in Division 6 after Justin Marks. Just nobody's talking about him. Caden Brochu last year, he had 36.
They have a dynamic running game. Well, they have multiple backs that can impact the game.
For sure, and they're kind of similar to Fairhaven in that regard. Like, they have the one star back, but they have multiple guys that can carry it. And Brochu last year, 36 touchdowns, over 2,000 yards. He's putting up monster numbers again this year. I think it's going to be a really competitive game. I think Bay Path, arguably the most underrated team in Division 6. Division 6 is absolutely loaded. Like, I think that's the most competitive division in the state. There are legitimately like 12 teams that could compete for a state title. It's kind of wild. So I think this is going to be a really good game. I think Clinton's good. I think they're one of the favorites in Division 7, one of the 5 best teams in Division 7. But I think Bay Path is just kind of this team that's flying under the radar this year. I like Bay Path.
Yeah, this is a coming out party type of game for Bay Path. I think they could really get people's attention with a win here against a good Clinton team. I think they get it done. I think you mentioned Brochu. I mean, 36 touchdowns last year. He's terrific. They run the wing tee. They get the ball to multiple guys. I think that proves to be the difference here, the diversity of their offense. We saw how much Clinton struggled with the diversity of Hudson's offense and Jake Attaway. I think it's kind of the same thing here. I don't think that the score is the same. I think this will be a much tighter game, but I'm going with Bay Path as well. All right, next up, we go back to the MVC, and we have Central Catholic at Billerica. 2 heavyweights here, 2 programs that have had success through the years in the MVC. This should be a good one between a much improved Central Catholic team and a Billerica team that has some good experience back from last year.
This is going to be a really fun game. And I think Billerica, to me, that's still one of the more surprising results, that first game of the year when they lost to Masco. Then they rebounded nicely against Westford Academy, and they have a lot of pieces back from last year. I expect this to be a really competitive game. I do like the way Central's playing. Like, they've hung tough. They hung tough with St. John's Prep. They did get beat up by Springfield Central, but they had that close win against Franklin as well. So they've played in some close games. They're battle tested. It's one of the more difficult schedules in the state. Again, this is another true toss-up. I think I lean Raiders here. It's just kind of surprising. Like, if Central loses their 1-3, if Billerica loses their 1-2, I don't think many people would have predicted that heading into the season based on the past success from these programs. So I think it's going to be a really good game, competitive game, but I lean Raiders slightly, something like 24-20.
Yeah, Billerica is still hard to figure out. I still think there'll be a player in D3 when the dust settles, but they're hard to figure out. I'm leaning Central Catholic here as well in a close one, but I do want to see more out of this Billerica team because I do think they have a lot of good talent back at the quarterback position, the skill positions, and we know Siggs. Siggs is one of the top coaches in the state. He'll get them going come playoff time, but Central Catholic is starting to figure it out. And Coach Sexton has those guys, especially the young guys, playing well. They're believing. This would be a big win for them if they could get it. I'm going to lean Central Catholic here. All right, next up, we have Norwood at Shawsheen. Pretty interesting matchup here, Division 4-5 matchup, a non-league matchup in this age of multiple teams playing each other across the state. This is a pretty intriguing matchup this week. Of course, as I mentioned, Norwood coming off a loss to KP last week. Shawsheen is led by our guy there, slinging Sid Tildesley, one of the best quarterbacks, not only in D5, but in the state. Pretty intriguing matchup, but for the Rams, this is an opportunity to really send a message to the rest of Division 5 that, hey, we're good enough. If they could beat a talented Norwood team, that looks like they might be the favorite in the Tri-Valley Large.
Yeah, I think kind of like similar to Bay Path, like for whatever reason, like tech schools, no matter how much talent they have, no matter who they beat, they're always going to fly under the radar. And we've only seen one tech school, so we're 10 years in here of the statewide format, and we've only seen Blackstone Valley win as a tech school. and Shawshine's the only other team to advance to a state championship game. So I think Shawshine's going to be in the mix again. I think they're one of the better teams in Division 5. You mentioned Tilsley, one of the best players in the state, regardless of division. He does it all for them. He's going to intercept passes on defense. He can make plays with his arm or his legs. He's returning punts this year. He has a couple punt return touchdowns. He's a very good player, very dynamic player. He's been making plays for 4 years for this Rams program. I expect them to be one of the 4 best teams in Division 5 throughout the year. I love to see. I love to see what they did with that schedule this year, right? Like they just beat up on Winthrop, they beat Bedford, they beat Belmont. Now they have Norwood. Next week they have Wayland. So a very difficult schedule for this program. I think they're one of the better teams in D5. I think they're better on paper than Norwood, and I think they have a lot of big game experience. They have a lot of multi-year contributors here. I like the Rams.
This is going to be an interesting game for me from a pick standpoint because, I could go with my high school alma mater here in Norwood and say they're going to win because of this. My concern for them is going out there and playing in that environment. We all know how good Tilsley is, how good Shawshene is. But for me, I want to see if Norwood can go out there and play in that environment. It's a different environment. It's a longer road trip than what they're accustomed to. Look, Norwood's a good football team, okay? You got Jack Dwyer, who's one of the more underrated running backs in the state. You got Drew Bartuka, who's one of the best linebackers in the state. They've got some pieces. Question is, can they go out there, score early, carry the play, and put the pressure on Tilsley and the Rams? I think they can, but this one's a hard one for me. I almost feel like it's a toss-up. I'm going to go Norwood, not because they're the alma mater, not because they're the employer, but because I honestly believe that they're a good football team. They've played a good schedule. They're 1-2, but they beat Stoughton 28-0. They played a Canton team that appears to be somewhat legitimate here. They're off to a really good start. Anthony Fountain's done a good job there. They seem to be legit. And now they played King Philip, who they gave fits to last week. And now they go to Shawshene. So I'm leaning Norwood in a close one here, but I think this one's going to be a good one. All right, up next we have Marblehead at North Andover. Pretty interesting matchup here. I mean, North Andover, one of those teams in the MVC that could surprise, kind of a dark horse in D2. Marblehead, they usually start to play their best football at the midway point of the season and into the playoffs. Pretty intriguing matchup here between two teams that could surprise come playoff time.
Yeah, I think they're both coming off blowout wins. I think they're going to be in pretty similar boats. Like I think Marblehead and North Andover. I think they're Marblehead D4, North Andover D2. I think they're both playoff teams. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if we see them win a game or two come November. I think the best player on the field in this game is Ben Iglesias. He's been one of the better running backs in the state to this point. I think he makes a couple plays late. North Andover pulls away. It's going to be a pretty competitive game, though, but I lean Scarlet Knights here.
Yeah, I'm going to go with North Andover as well. You mentioned Iglesias. He's been terrific, kind of flying under the radar, but the more big games he starts to play in as the season goes on, I think more people will be familiar with him. Marblehead coming off a nice win against Shepherd Hill last week, bouncing back after losing to King Philip 2 weeks ago. I think North Andover, however, is a little bit more talented, a little bit more diverse on offense. I expect this to be a close game, but I'm going to go with North Andover as well. Next up, we have the M&M matchup, Marshfield at Mansfield. This one should be a pretty good one. Mansfield coming off a 49-0 win in an interstate matchup against Johnston, Rhode Island. Marshfield, of course, when you look at Marshfield, come from behind win against Bethune a couple weeks ago. We all know that's your favorite skill group in the state. You love those guys, Tor Moss and Davin True and Charlie Carroll. Point is this. That's a talented skill group, and with their pace and the tempo they play at, they cause problems for opposing defenses. Mansfield's going to have their hands full in this one.
They are going to have their hands full, and this group can really score, as we know. Speaking of Marshfield, I was at the game last year. It was very low scoring, which is like not at all what I expected. Trevor Foley gave Marshfield fits in that game like he did to pretty much every team he played against in high school. He's not there, obviously, anymore. So
I think Brown now.
He is at Brown. So I think Mansfield, like they won't be shut out like they were against Duxbury. They're going to get on the board. I don't think they're going to be able to put up, in the 40s though, like we've seen a couple. They have 2 blowout wins. I don't think that's going to be the case at all. Marshfield plays one of the more difficult schedules every single year. And I think especially as we get deeper to the season, you get more games under your belt. This pace that Marshfield plays at just really starts to wear teams down. Tormos, he's an all-state level quarterback. Davin True, very tough playmaker. I think Will Devine's arguably the most underrated defender in the state as well. This Marshfield team's really good. I think they're clearly one of the top 3 teams in Division II. Mansfield's good. I think they're going to compete in Division III. I don't know if they're the favorite or on the short list of favorites, but they're certainly a contender in Division III. It's tough to pick against a Mike Redding team, right? But I think Marshfield just has too much offensively, and they get the job done.
Yeah, I agree. It is tough to pick against a Mike Redding team, and I've coached against Mansfield for years. I know how good they are. But I think in the end, this Marshfield team is going to start to hit their stride here. They're going to find their mojo. I think this will be a good game. I think Mansfield's defense will play well. They'll keep them in the game. But I think ultimately Marshfield has an advantage at the skill positions. They're going to against most people. That's going to be their advantage this week. That proves to be the difference. Give me Marshfield here in a 28-14 kind of game. All right, next up we have Milford at Natick. Milford surviving last week against Wellesley 7-6, as we mentioned earlier. Natick with a big road win at Walpole. Natick kind of flying under the radar. They played a pretty good schedule so far. This is an intriguing matchup. You know, when you look at Milford, really talented starting group. You got Buckley, you got Rivera. They got guys that can make plays. Not big numbers, though. Depth seems to potentially be an issue for them. Natick, big physical team. I expect this one to be a pretty good game.
This is going to be a pretty good game, and they both play challenging schedules. Milford's probably played, if not the most difficult, one of the most difficult schedules among Division III teams. So I think they're definitely going to be ready, especially after they get through, after they get through the Hawk and play Franklin and KP. They're going to be battle tested, and they're going to be ready come November for whatever is thrown their way in Division III. I think this is very similar to the Walpole-Wellesley game, where this is going to be a very low-scoring game. I lean Natick. I think Natick has a very good defense. I think they're kind of flying under the radar, or at least flying under the radar heading into the season. I like Natick here. I think it's going to be a competitive game, old school game, running game, defense, 17-14 Natick.
Yeah, I could see it being that kind of game too, but I'm going to go with Milford here. I think that last week was sort of an awakening for them, and I think it's kind of the kick in the pants that they needed to be more consistent, and I think that they're going to pick up a big road win here. They do have a bye after this, or if they do pick up this win here, they can go into Hockomock League play with some momentum. It would be a nice win for them. I'm with you that it'll be that type of game from a scoring standpoint, but I'm going with Milford there. All right, next up we have Rockland at Mashpee. Another intriguing matchup here on the South Coast. Should be a pretty good one between two programs that in recent years have had a lot of championship caliber success, and two programs that there's familiarity there.
Yeah, there is a lot of familiarity there on the different sides of the South Shore League, but they have played each other in the past. Mashpee I think is one of the better teams. They're arguably the favorite in Division 7, and that's true every year. Matt Treveri does an outstanding job with this program. Rockland's lost a lot. So they had this great run recently. Of course, they won the state championship against Abington a few years back. They've been in the mix these last few years as well. In 22 and 23, they were in the mix. They'll probably be a playoff team in Division 7. They could play each other again down the road. I just think Mashpee has too much, especially on offense. Last week was kind of a challenging week for Mashpee. They had to deal with some, delays and the game getting delayed due to the weather. They finally get over to Nantucket and they beat them 40-7. They were up 40-0 in that game, running clock in the fourth quarter. And that's a decent Nantucket team. So Mashpee, I think that was a very impressive win at this stage. Anyway, I just think Mashpee is clearly the better team. So I go with the Falcons.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Mashpee here as well. I mean, they had set a standard there in the mid-2010s where it seemed like they were at Gillette every year for about a 5-year period. They've hit a little bit of a lull the last few years, but I think Matt Treveri's got this program back on track here. I do agree with you. They'll be the favorites in D7. I'm going Mashpee here as well. You are watching the high school preview show presented by Gold Athletics. I'm your host, John Serenitas, joined by my partner, Tyler Amaral. Just a reminder, coaches, if you are in need of a fundraiser, and want to make good money fast to help your program, then you need to visit goldathletics.com today. Matt Ross and his team have any kind of a fundraiser that you need to help your program generate funds to support itself. Again, visit goldathletics.com today. All right, next up we have Hudson at Worcester South. Hudson off to a great start. Worcester South off to a slow start here. Hudson looks like they're among the favorites in D6. We've been talking about it now for the past few weeks. Tough matchup here for Worcester South.
It is a tough matchup, and I think that Hudson offense just puts so much pressure on defense, regardless of who it is. I think Worcester South, I think they're a good team. They've really built a good culture recently. They've been a playoff team multiple years. So I think they could be a playoff team again. I don't think they're like a shoe-in or surefire playoff team in Division IV, but they'll definitely be in the mix. They're a good competitive program. With that said, though, Hudson's just very good. They're arguably the best team in Central Mass, regardless of division. I think it's them and Leominster and Grafton. I think are probably the top three teams. So we saw last week Grafton beat up on South a little bit. I think it's going to be pretty similar. Attaway and that Hawks offense is just too high-powered.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm going Hudson here as well. Mike checks in. What about Bishop Fee in D2? They'll be in the mix. Absolutely. Owen Morris, they got a good defense. Coach Pinnabell does a good job. They'll be in the mix.
They're
a team that could very easily come out of D2. I mean, D2 is kind of wide open this year, even though you got CM and KP and Marshfield as a presumptive top three teams. But no one's forgetting about Fee, and they'll be in the mix when it counts.
Yeah, I've kind of, like, going back to August, I've kind of had Fee and pegged as that fourth best team. I think most people agree that there's a consensus top three in D2, CM, Marshfield, KP, in no particular order. I think Fee is that fourth best team. John, of course, a couple years ago how competitive that Fee and KP game was in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Wouldn't surprise me again if they make a run like that and they're competing with some of these powers in D2.
No, I agree. All right, next up we have Old Rochester at Dartmouth. Dartmouth is 3-0, and they've only given up 7 points all year. Old Rochester, traditional I team, physical, run the ball. Should be a pretty good matchup. Good test for Old Rochester as well. A couple of close wins early in the season for Old Rochester, but this is a different beast. This will be by far the best team they've played so far. And same for Dartmouth.
Yeah, well, I think it's a little bit of a toss-up. I think Old Rochester saw a really good Fairhaven team last week. And they played them tough. And last year, I was at that game. I think it was 28-0. Fairhaven beat Old Rochester. And so they really had a chance to win this game. Justin Marks wasn't even the leading rusher for Fairhaven last week. So I think that goes to show you that Old Rochester really prepared, and they were able to take away Fairhaven's top strength. The issue here is Dartmouth has two guys. They have Ray Gramlich and Jackson Hart in the backfield. Those are two of the better playmakers in Division III. Dartmouth hasn't played a competitive game yet. I think they will this time around, but I think the Indians ultimately have just a little bit too much firepower. But don't sleep on Gavin Martin and the Bulldogs. I like the Indians 28-20, 28-17, something like that, but I think Dartmouth just has too much talent.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Dartmouth as well. Jackson Hart, one of the best players in Division III. Sleeper team in D3. I don't think enough people are talking about the Indians. And yeah, I know we talk about their strength of schedule early in the year, but it doesn't matter. This would be a quality win for them. I think they get it done. I think Old Rochester is game, though. I'm with you. I think this could be a 7 to 10 point win for Dartmouth. Next up, we have another interstate matchup when Cumberland out of Rhode Island visits Reading. Reading off to a 2-0 start. Cumberland coming off a 35-12 loss to Bishop Hendricken, but Cumberland should be a player in the reformatted Division I in Rhode Island. Coach Lima has a pretty good team back, led by Evan Spencer. This should be a pretty good test for Reading. I got a chance to see Cumberland a bunch this summer. They're a good football team. This should be a good matchup.
It should be a good matchup, and I think Cumberland, we've talked about this the last few weeks. I think Cumberland, along with Barrington and North Kingstown, that's kind of the top three publics in Rhode Island, and they're the teams that have the best chance of unseating Hendricken and LaSalle in Division I of Rhode Island. And I think this Cumberland team is very good. I think that some sort of a little bit of an equalizer here is this road trip. Like the Cumberland to Reading that's not an ideal road trip to be making. It looks like the Rockets are back. They struggled a bit last year. Devon Bursey's really making some plays for them this year. I think the Rockets are going to be competitive. I think this is like we were just talking about Dartmouth, how they're kind of a forgotten Division III team. Division III, like Division VI, very loaded division. I think Reading is a team that people just even forget is in Division III because they were in Division II for so long, and they didn't make the playoffs last year. But Reading's a Division III team. They're going to be in the mix this year. It seems like they've rebounded a little bit. Ultimately, though, I think Cumberland's a top 5 team in Rhode Island, and I think they pull it out on the road 20-14, something like that. I think it'll be lower scoring.
Yeah, Rhode Island has proven they can play with Massachusetts teams. Obviously, we saw LaSalle beat St. John Shrewsbury a couple of weeks ago. Rhode Island has had success against Massachusetts, and I think this is another example of that. I think Reading's going to get better as the year goes on, but I think this Cumberland team is too talented. I think it's a one-score game, but I think they go on the road and win a big interstate matchup for Rhode Island. To pick up a win over a quality program like Reading would be a pretty big deal. All right, we're going to go a little quicker here, so let's go over to the ISL. Big one on Saturday. Our Adam Kirchen is slated to be there. BB&N at Milton Academy. This is, to me, is one of the best rivalries in the ISL. BB&N, of course, top 5 in our top 10 NEPSAC poll. BB&N is also one of the favorites to win the ISL large. Should be a really good matchup between two programs that know each other well.
For sure. I think this is maybe the best game in New England this weekend. It's going to be really competitive, but how do I bet against Bo McCormick right now? So I got BB&N.
It's hard to bet against Bo McCormick, Damon Taylor, and I think the one thing with BB&N is we know Mike Willie wants to line up in the eye, pound the ball, play physical. Bo McCormick, if need be, is going to get 40 touches. But having a playmaker like Damon Taylor at quarterback opens things up for that offense now, makes them even harder to defend. I think Coach Mason and the Mustangs are not as healthy as they could be. I think that'll be part of the difference here. But this is a really good BB&N team that's going to be in the mix all year for the ISL large bowl game caliber team. Give me BB&N in this one. Next up, we have Jeff Moore's Tabor Academy Seawolves. They'll travel to Governor's Academy. Impressive 49-0 win over St. Mark's last week for the Seawolves. Governors has running back Dawson Dubose, former BR running back, in the backfield for them. This should be a really good test for Tabor, but man, that Tabor team is loaded.
Tabor is loaded, and I think it's impossible to overstate like the job Jeff Moore has done there in such a quick amount of time. Like, this is one of the best programs in New England now. They are absolutely loaded. Everybody talks about the running game, but I think it's going to be the passing game that gets it done in this one. That Bork to Drinkwater connection. I like Tabor in this one. I think it's going to be a pretty competitive game. I just don't know how you stop this Tabor offense.
Yeah, I think Govs can hang around for a little bit, but the thing with that Tabor offense is you got Bork, Drinkwater, you got Hugo in the backfield. I mean, big offensive line. They can hit you on a big play at any given moment. Another team that is among the favorites to win the ISL large should end up in a bowl game as well at season's end. I think Tabor's just too much here for Governors in this one. All right, next up we have arguably the best interstate matchup of the weekend, one of the best ones of the year. Bishop Hendricken will travel to Greenwich on Friday to take on the Cardinals. It's a 4:45 kickoff. We're trying to get someone down there to cover it, to be determined. But this is going to be one hell of a game between the preeminent program in Rhode Island and a Greenwich team that has seemingly found their mojo again. They seem to be a player now again in Class LL. You got D'Angelo at quarterback, who's a dual threat. Peter Von Vulaki's up front, the Navy commit. Greenwich is going to be a tough matchup physically for Hendricken, even though Hendricken, this is as good a Hendricken team as they've had the last few years.
It is, right. And I think so. It's so weird to me, right? Seeing a Connecticut team play, not an interstate game against another team for New England, which I love to see it. And I hope we continue to see this. So I'm happy that Greenwich has Hendricken on the schedule this year. I think this is going to be an awesome game. You mentioned one of the better interstate matchups in New England this year. I think it will live up to the hype. Ultimately, I'm going to lean Greenwich here. I think that defense makes a couple plays down the stretch, 21-14, 21-17, something like that, but I got Greenwich.
Yeah, Greenwich is D'Angelo has been a difference maker for them, and we know how good they are up front. That was the strength of their team coming into this season. It's hard to pick against Hendricken, though, but I'm with you here. I think this is a close game, but I think Hendricken's going to have a hard time stopping D'Angelo, stopping that running game for Greenwich. I think Greenwich can lean on him a little bit, even though Hendricken has the size defensively to hold up. I think this is a low-scoring game, a 17-14 kind of game, but I'm going home team here. I'm going with the Cardinals in this one. Next up, you have another intriguing Alliance game in Connecticut this weekend. Massac visiting New Canaan. New Canaan, the number one team in our poll. They didn't start as the number one team in our poll. Darien did, but after 2 weeks, they're now number one in our poll. The Rams are rolling here. Luke Robinson at quarterback, the Robinson to connect, Esposito connection. Massac plays good defense, but man, Lou Marinelli's Rams are the real deal, man. They haven't skipped a beat, even though they graduated so many guys from last year's Class L championship team.
Yeah, I think this is the best offense in Connecticut. I think they get it done again. I think they make it 3 for 3 in terms of scoring over 40 points on the season. I think it'll be a little bit more competitive than some of these other games we've seen, but they beat Maloney early, 42-13, I believe the score was. So yeah. I think
and Maloney's loaded skill wise.
Yeah, so I think it'll be a little bit closer than that, but I can't bet against New Canaan right now.
And speaking of Maloney, of course, they will visit Staples on Friday night, and what should be a pretty good game. Our Craig Boland is scheduled to be there for that one. The Wreckers off to a great start here. You'd think after graduating Caleb Smith in a talented senior class, they would admit that they would possibly take a step back. They haven't. They've been pretty impressive to open the season. Maloney, we talk about that team. Jesus Martel, you've got Nadeski, a quarterback, that three-headed monster. They're really good, coming off a win last week. This is an intriguing matchup. For me, Maloney needs to prove that defensively they have what it takes to win these kinds of games. It's hard to pick against the Wreckers here just because, again, like I said, Staples doesn't seem like they're going to skip a beat here. They're going to be a player once again in Class LL.
Yeah, but I just said that New Canaan, I think, has the best offense in the state. I think Staples might have the best defense in the state. They've only given up 14 points combined over the first 2 weeks of the season. It's tough to bet against Staples right now. I think they pull it out. It's going to be low scoring again, 14-7, 14-10, something like that.
Yeah, and of course, one of the other big matchups in Connecticut is Darien and Windsor. This might be one of the best skill matchups in New England all season long. I mean, both of these teams have terrific skill. Of course, we all know about Darien's skill. Obviously, you got the Georgia Tech commit Roach. You got Rolap at quarterback. Andy Grant's team is loaded for days offensively. Play pretty good defense, too. Both them and New Canaan do. That Thanksgiving game, New Canaan, Darien, that might be the best Thanksgiving game in New England on November 28th. But before we get there, Darien will have their hands full with this Windsor team. Very skilled, explosive offensively. But Darien is a wagon right now. They're legit. It's hard to pick against them.
It is hard to pick against them. I'm not going to do that here. I think we've covered the top three teams, at least in my opinion, in Connecticut: Greenwich, Staples, Darien, or New Canaan. So I think we've talked about the four top teams in Connecticut in this episode. So I think they're all going to make runs this year in the playoffs. And I can't go against Darien right now.
Yeah, next up, we're going to head up to Maine. I'm going with Darien as well. It's hard to pick against them. I think both them and New Canaan will go into that Thanksgiving game undefeated. I mean, they're the two best teams in Connecticut, at least up to this point. Next up, we go up to Maine for a big one. Lewiston at Portland. These are two of the best teams in Class A in Maine. Lewiston is 2-0. Big win over Bonnie Eagle week 1. They also beat Bangor last week. Portland is 2-1. They lost to Bonnie Eagle last week. But nonetheless, Coach Green's Bulldogs are one of the better teams in Class A. They play well at home. This should be a pretty good matchup for them, though. Lewiston has been kind of flying under the radar the last couple of years in Class A, but they're making some noise now, starting to get people's attention. This should be a pretty good game here. I'm leaning Portland. I do think they bounced back after a tough loss to Bonnie Eagle last week, but I don't want to sell this Lewiston team short.
Yeah, I think this is another one of these coin flip games. We've talked about common opponents. The common opponent here is Bonnie Eagle. I lean Lewiston, not just because of the results with Bonnie Eagle. I just like the way they're playing right now. I think they probably win here 21-14, 26-20. I think it's a one-possession game, something like that.
You're picking Portland, you mean?
No, I'm picking Lewiston.
You're picking Lewiston. Okay, I lost you there for a second. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. No, I got Lewiston.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to go with Portland. I think they bounce back again. It's interesting. Lewiston beats Bonnie Eagle. Bonnie Eagle beats Portland, but I think ultimately, I think Portland will be in the mix in Class A. I mean, you have the monster that is Thornton Academy sitting there, but Portland to me is on the doorstep. They've been knocking on the door the last couple of years. This could be the year that they finally kick in the door. But it'll be tough because Thornton is Thornton. They're really good, and Bonnie Eagle will be in the mix as well. But Lewiston, like you said, sleeper there, but I'm going with Portland in that one. Next up, we go to New Hampshire for a big Division I matchup, a rivalry game. Pinkerton at Londonderry, always one of the best takes of the year in New Hampshire high school football, two powerhouse programs in the Granite State. I always have a tough time picking against Brian O'Reilly's Astros, man. I just think the way that they execute their offense, their athleticism, they run arguably the best wing tee in New England of any program. I think to me that proves to be the difference here. Jimmy Lazon, when he's had really good teams at Londonderry, they've been teams that are athletic, that have playmakers in space. I think they're big in their physical this year, some good young skill, but I think Pinkerton has a slight edge in that area, and I think that proves to be the difference. I'm going with the Astros here.
Yeah, again, two of the top teams in New Hampshire, year in, year out. We've seen them both play some good Division I teams from Massachusetts. Pinkerton really beat up on Andover. I think they're slightly better than Londonderry right now. They're in that mix, of course, with Bedford as well. I think it's going to be an awesome game. I like Pinkerton, though, 28-21.
Yeah, and I'm going to go with Pinkerton here as well. I mean, Londonderry, tough loss a couple of weeks ago to St. John's Prep, but Pinkerton, to me, right now, as it stands, is probably the second best team in D1 behind Bedford. They could end up facing Bedford at the end of the year, but this game, I think, will give us a pretty good indication of how Division I is going to play out in New Hampshire the rest of the way. And finally, we go to Vermont. Matchup of the weekend up in Vermont is Hartford at Mount Anthony, two of the best programs in Vermont. Hartford won this game 35-0 last year, so Mount Anthony will be looking for revenge. Hartford's been pretty good. The Hurricanes have been one of the favorites in Division I going into the season. They're playing like it. Mount Anthony, though, they've been pretty tough so far this year. This is a pretty intriguing matchup. I'm going with the Hurricanes in this one, though. I think they pick up a big road win.
I agree. I'm going with Hartford. I think it's going to be much closer than 35-0. I think it's probably still a multi-score game, though. Maybe something like 28-14, 26-12, something like that. But I think Hartford ultimately is still too good in this one.
And our final game of the night that we're going to look at is the last interstate matchup. North Kingstown visiting Westfield. We both agree this is a pretty intriguing game. North Kingstown coming off a tough 20-13 loss to LaSalle. Westfield off to a 1-1 start here, but a pretty tough game here. I think that this could be an intriguing matchup, but it's going to be a unique setting for North Kingstown visiting Westfield.
It is going to be a kind of a unique road trip here. We've talked about North Kingstown earlier in the show. We've talked about them pretty much every week, it seems. They're one of the top three publics in Rhode Island, in my opinion. I think they're going to be a playoff team again this year. Westfield is a team that's had some success recently in Massachusetts. They made a run last year in Division III in Massachusetts, semifinal team. I think so. They lost, they got blown out by Milford, but I think they're better than that score would indicate. North Kingstown, I think ultimately, they're probably a little bit more skilled right now, a little bit more experienced. I'm going to lean North Kingstown here, like 26-20, but I think it's going to be a really fun game.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a fun game too. And North Kingstown's a tough team to figure out for me. I mean, like I said, They lost to LaSalle last week, but they played them close. They played tough. They were in it, but they're a tough team to figure out. They're coming into this game 0-2, though, and I think that that's something that sticks with me. I think it's going to be tough to get on a bus, go all the way up to Westfield, and play a team that's coming off a nice win where they scored 36 points. Westfield is a team that leans on their defense and their running game. Looks like they're going to be built a little different this year, but I'm going to go with Westfield in this one. I think that Westfield takes care of business at home against a North Kingstown team that I think coming into the season had some good talent back and some experience, but a lot of their young guys need to step up for them to be a player in Rhode Island. All right. Well, Tyler, great show as always, my friend. Really appreciate the time. No one previews high school football quite like we do. We run the gamut. We talk about games in all 6 states. Always fun doing this with you, man. Let's do this again next week.
Let's do it. Looking forward to it.
All right. Well, that'll do it for this week's episode of the High School Preview Show. For Tyler Amaral, I'm John Serenitas. Until next time.